Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Family Matters. Today we have some very special guests, all the way from America, John and Mary Bilello, and they're going to be talking to us today about becoming simpatico in marriage. I hope I said that right. It's an Italian word, and we're going to hear all about it, what that means. So we're really looking forward to it. Now, John and Mary live in Michigan in the USA. They've been married for 63 years. And among the many books that John has written, the book we're going to be talking about today is entitled Bible Guidelines for a Happy Marriage, and by John C. Bilello. So we're really looking forward to talking to you today. Welcome to Family Matters.
Greetings, and again, thank you very much for inviting us. We're honored.
This is
how did you get a hold of that book? How did you find out about it?
yeah, I'll recommend it to you afterwards.
we have a ways and means.
Okay, before we start, let's just open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time together today. We thank you that we can talk over the distances like this and to be able to share your truth with each other. We thank you for the encouragement that we can get today for marriage, and we pray that you would help us in our marriages to become one, to become the way you want us to be, just like you and Christ in the ecclesia. Please be with us today. Guide our discussion, we pray, through Jesus Christ. Amen.
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 So I just wanted to do three quick little Bible readings. And they're all from the Song of Solomon. And they go like this. Song of Solomon's chapter 2, verse 16 says, "My lover is mine, and I am his." Song of Solomon 6, verse 31 says, "I am my lover's, and my lover is mine." And Song of Solomon 7, verse 10 says, "I belong to my lover, and his desire is for me." And so I hope that sort of shows a little bit of what we're going to be talking about today. So welcome again, John and Mary. And just start out. Tell us a little bit about yourselves. A little bit about yourselves. How long have you been married? Have you got some children, grandchildren? Just tell us about your family and your marriage.
Well, as I said, I'm going to repeat it because thank you very much for inviting us. It's this Zoom and GoToMeeting, everything has made Mary and I and me far busier than we have been speaking in years, because we don't really like to get on airplanes if we can avoid it. I do want an answer. How did you get a hold of the book? Because I know it's, I didn't think it sold outside of North America.
Well, I actually had to track it down. I spent a while looking for it because I knew it existed, and I actually found a copy in Australia and managed to order it online. So
Australia.
Yeah,
yes.
well, Anthony Pat had it from in Australia.
Oh, interesting. So let me tell you a little about ourselves. Okay, as I was saying earlier, I'm a third generation Christadelphian. My grandfather, on my mother's side, my grandfather was baptized, I believe, in 1922, so almost 99 years ago. He was an Italian immigrant from Salerno, southern Italy, and my grandmother on my mother's side was actually born in the United States. Her family came over very early, 1867. So we have Mary was Catholic when I met her, and that was my first challenge in life. We met on a blind date. My roommate in college at New York University fixed me up for there's a tradition at that college was on the evening in the fall when you gain that hour, they run a party because we had a curfew. College kids don't have curfews anymore. But in those days, in the 1950s, you got that extra hour. So I got a date, and she completely blew me away. She talked and talked and talked, and I listened and listened. And I was so taken by her that I'm a real Italian boy. I'm a real mother's boy. I actually called my mother the next day, and there was a payphone. There was no cell phones. You didn't have phones in your dorm rooms. I had to get online and put my dime in. And I called my mother and said, I met the girl I'm going to marry.
Okay.
And the phone went dead.
Oh, no.
I said, Mom, are you there? Your mother. She says, wait until you get home. We'll find out. So that's how I met Mary. And it's October 26, 1957. We still remember it. We still celebrate it because it was a wonderful day.
It was a great day.
You did tell them about the rest of the family.
Was the story the same for you, Mary?
Pardon?
Was the story the same for you? Was it love at first sight for you as well?
It wasn't, no. But I was very taken by him. I definitely was. As he said, he's a good listener. And he listened to me go. I never felt so comfortable with a guy before.
Yep.
You know, go to the parties that somebody arranged in your meeting and you're trying to talk to somebody, you felt like you had to impress them. I didn't feel that with John. I just felt very relaxed.
Wow.
So I knew
Yeah.
that was something unusual and different.
Yeah.
But,
And
well-
and so was the differences in religion a big problem for you both?
Not really. I mean, I heard he had an Italian name, and I thought, oh, people, you know, he should be a Catholic, because other girls in my class or the class below me said he had this funny religion.
Okay.
We are definitely a peculiar people.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so I thought, well, I'll bring him back to the Catholic Church. I
Okay.
found out later, much later, that he never had been a Catholic. So that was the obstacles we had was with my parents
Okay.
because they were very Catholic. You know, we didn't have a Catholic school or any of that, but I went through all the rituals of Catholicism, First Communion, confirmation, and all that. But I had always been questioning, why do we pray to saints? What is this all about? And as John started talking to me, it made sense. And even now, today, after over 60 years of being a Christadelphian, I read things and when we do our readings and say, how did I believe this? Look at this.
Yeah. Okay.
It still amazes me.
Yeah. So you've been married 63 years. I take it you've got children, grandchildren?
We have,
Yeah, we'll tell you about that. Not so fast.
yeah, wait. We have 3 sons. Oddly enough, and I find it very hard to believe that this year we'll have all of them in their 50s. The youngest one will turn 50 this year.
Oh,
But we
wow.
have 3 sons, 2 are married, and each one have two children. So we have a boy and girl from both of them. So we have that. We have a granddaughter who is married and is going to make us great grandparents in the fall.
God willing.
Ah,
Lord
Very
willing.
exciting.
That's exciting.
So I can
Yes.
tell you a little bit about it. Our oldest boy, Andy, is 57. Him and Shelley, his wife, live in Baltimore area, and he's the recording brother of the Baltimore meeting.
Yep.
Our middle son is 55. We live in the same house with our middle son and youngest. We have an in-law apartment, so we share this house. I can tell you a little about that later. He's the recording brother of the Ann Arbor meeting. And the third boy, Matthew, the youngest, he's back now after spending a number of years as a missionary, as a Christadelphian missionary in South Africa.
Right.
He's the
Okay.
only one. He's not married. Um, the the um, the reason we actually share this house is about 2014. I got very sick, and I was laid up for almost 6 months. And I won't go into the details because but nothing more boring than hearing about other people's illnesses. But anyway, it's pretty obvious we couldn't handle a house anymore.
Right.
And so my middle son lived around the corner from us, and he said, "Why don't we sell both our houses, build a house, and you have an in-law apartment, and then Dottie and I, our daughter-in-law, who's just a wonderful woman, we can start taking care of you." So that's what we did. We sold both our houses, and we built a house, which partly I was the architect of, and we live now on a lake about 7 miles west of Ann Arbor. And it's been very, very well. I've actually had a second wind after physical therapy and a lot of other stuff, and feeling a lot better. And we can walk miles when the weather is good.
When we're not on lockdown.
Yeah. So it
When
took
you're not
me
on
about
lockdown, yeah. Oh, well,
yeah,
we'll
it
look
took me
forward to seeing you in New Zealand sometime then when the lockdowns are all finished.
You know what? One thing that we didn't say is Gordon mentioned something when we first came on, and he said, I think they're in the Detroit. We are in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
yeah,
We have an ecclesia here, when it's about 40 miles west of the city of Detroit,
right.
and only a short distance from the airport. So if anybody comes in, please let us know.
Yes,
Okay.
we actually, it's interesting. When I did the Australian conference one time, and they took me to an Australian rules rugby. That is really crazy. Anyway, it was before they had the Olympics in Sydney, and there were about 30,000 people in the stands. And the brother who took us to the game, actually, brothers, I won't want to say, I don't want to embarrass him. Anyway, he said, well, you come from a really small town. It must be exciting being such a big stadium with 25, 30,000 people. I didn't have the heart to tell him that the town of Ann Arbor has about 100,000 population those days and has a football stadium with 100,000 seats because people come from everywhere. They come from hundreds of miles away to come to a football game. Anyway, you ask about how did we meet? It was, as I said, it was a blind date. My roommate set me up. He had gone out with her, and she didn't like him, and he didn't like her, so he dumped her on me and dumped me on her, and it just worked out.
It worked out.
It worked out.
Well,
I published a lot of good scientific papers in my lifetime, but my greatest achievement in life is convincing her to marry me.
After going out for a while, there was no convincing.
Yeah.
Started out with greatness
It was
and
a matter
carried
of
on
when.
63 years.
You asked how was courtship different in the 50s? I think today younger people seem to hang out in crowds. There seems to be a lot less expectations of commitment. Our youngest boy, who's now 50, he has had 2 Christadelphian girlfriends. Each one has strung him along for about 10 years. The first one ended up going to Australia, marrying someone else. And then the second one has strung him along for another 10 years. And then he took off and went to South Africa as a missionary. And she is still not married. And so she's in her 40s now. So it's not just men who don't have commitment. And he's been kind of a little depressed at times. And I told him, well, Mary and I said, maybe you're lucky. Maybe if you did marry them and they're not committed, and it's time to move on. But I don't know. Now that he's 50, I think he's almost given up on that. And he has said this to us, that commitment both by men and women is much different. Now, when I started going out with Mary, after I was going out with her for 6 months, I knew I wanted to marry her.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there was no doubt about it.
You know, it was courtship in the 50s was other ways different. When John and I met, I was living in New York City. We were doing our hospital clinicals there, but I went to college 250 miles north of New York City, almost Canada. So
Yeah.
when I went back for my last year of college, we had to actually write a letter. There were no emails,
Yeah.
no cell phones. So John finally got that he'd call me every Sunday and he would tell me what time so I'd be available and try to get anybody off the telephone that was in the hall.
It was a lot harder to communicate, but it was a lot more permanent.
Yeah.
I still have all of Mary's letters.
Oh, that's
And
nice.
60 years later, we have all our correspondence, so our kids someday can read it and write a biography if they want. But I think I can't imagine somebody writing emails that 60 years later they're going to mean anything or even be able to
If
find.
they have them, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So moving on a
And there
little
was-
bit.
What?
Oh, sorry. Just moving on a little bit. You wrote this book. It must have been some years later. I'm just looking for the date in it. 2013. So, you've been married for, some 50 odd years. What brought you to write a book on marriage?
Well, okay, so Mary and I are the oldest couple in our ecclesia, fairly large ecclesia. We have about 100 members, and there's 3 other ecclesias in the Detroit area, all of them fairly significant size. So there's several hundred Christadelphians in the area, and no doubt people would turn to us for advice, and then unfortunately, there have been some minor and some serious marriage problems. The way our ecclesia runs, we have a spiritual welfare committee with half a dozen people on it. So we're the most senior members. And if people come problems, they come to them. They don't necessarily go to the serving brethren. They go to some mature couples that they feel they can talk to, and it will be discreet, and they can air their difficulties.
That's great.
So we got involved in this maybe 20.
Even on Long Island when we were living in the East Coast.
Yes, even on the East Coast for a long time. And partly also because of our occupations. Now, Mary can tell you about hers, but I was a professor. I got my PhD from the University of Illinois in 1965, and I was a professor first at State University of New York for almost 20 years, and then later here in Michigan as a professor, and also a joint professor of Oxford University in England, where I went most summers to work there. So we got to know a lot of people. And when you're a professor, you get all kinds of guidebooks and workshops on how to handle students and student problems. And so I was pretty versed in emotional and other difficulties, all the way up to graduate student. I'm advising graduate students on their marriages and their relationships. And Mary can tell you about her background also, which was very helpful in learning about people problems.
I'm a nurse, while retired, but you're always a nurse.
Yeah, it was a nurse, yeah.
My main focus when I was working was obstetrics. I worked in obstetrics unit and I taught obstetrical nursing. And I did what we call in this country case management, where I helped families, I helped patients with discharging and different issues. One of my best stories is arranging for a couple to get married. He was dying of cancer and they were planning to get married. And I made the arrangement that the priest would come and marry them at the bedside, things like that. So, you have to talk people through with their illnesses and the family, and
So yeah, also
a people person is what I am.
Yes.
being a scientist and an experimentalist, I'm used to keeping lab notebooks and writing down everything you do so that you can work through the problem. So maybe 25, 30 years ago, as we started Counseling Tone Baby, I started keeping a notebook. And by keeping a notebook, I was able to build up a history of what kind of problems people ran into. So when I sat down to write the book, and in many years later, I had hundreds, maybe several hundreds of pages of notes on issues, and I went through it and grabbed the things that I thought were the most, the most interesting and most needful. And so it was based on a long history of dealing with these problems and recording them, noting them, and being very careful not to mention anyone personally, because that's a total no-no. Yeah, total no-no.
Yeah. So one of your chapter headings is on simpatico, and that's a fascinating word, simpatico.
Simpatico.
Can you tell us about that?
I am amazed at because in the United States, where there's a large ethnic population, people a lot of Italians, there's almost 20 million Italian people of Italian descent in the United States. They kind of know that, but you Anglos don't quite get it. Okay, so if you look it up, if you look at it in a dictionary, in an English dictionary, you're not really going to understand what simpatico means. To an Italian and an ethnic person, it has many, many shades of meanings. It's just like if you take the word love. In English, there's one word, love. As you're Bible students, you know that in Greek, that's not even true. Well, actually, in Italian, there are 100 ways to say I love you.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
No wonder Italians are so romantic.
It's in the blood.
It's in the blood.
And we had a very close I grew up in a very close family. And Mary knows this, that when I took her home, if my mother and my grandfather didn't approve of her, that was it. No woman that ever dated, if my mom didn't like them, she wasn't going to fit in our family. That was just not.
Okay.
Unfortunately, my mom ended up liking her better than me. Because my mother only had me and my brother. She didn't have any girls, so Mary became her girl. So simpatico. Yeah. Simpatico is a feeling of oneness. This is just right. It can be a person. It can be even an object. It can be a work of art. It can be an idea. So if you're simpatico, you just resonate. It's something that you know. Mary and I just know. Sometimes she says something to me, and ironically, I was thinking the same thing at exactly the same time. And sometimes I will be thinking of something, and she say, I was thinking, and this happens quite frequently, and I don't think it is telepathy. I don't think it's anything kinetic. I just think it's because we know each other so well, and faced with a situation, we will end up thinking almost the same way.
Right. Yeah.
Can you be trained to do that?
I don't think so.
I don't know. But I think if you pay more and more attention to the other person instead of your own thinking, you will eventually become almost like there's not two of you. In fact, we went to one Bible school one time. And one of these sisters came up. I think I was doing the Bible school. She came up to me and she said, "You and Mary are unbelievable. Are you joined at the hip?"
We do think alike, but we complement each other in different things, and we've learned from each other. I had likes that he didn't have, and he had likes I didn't. I knew nothing about opera. I knew nothing about art, and he's taught me these things, and I've learned to appreciate them.
But there's more, I think a little bit more than that too. See, I grew up around opera because my grandfather was a great opera buff, and he named my mother's actual name was not Catherine, it was Aida, and another and one of his daughters was Gilda, all from Italian operas. So I grew up, and my mother's sister Annette actually sang in the Metropolitan Opera chorus. So I used to be able to go to operas free and just go backstage and listen. But also there were things that were very different on, and when we met, and we learned, you learn complementarity. I think, if you take some of these dating apps, they're all based on the idea that like and like. But I learned from also, there was another thing I get when writing this book, being on a university campus, I was able to talk to a lot of people who are in the social sciences, who do psychology, and test my ideas. So I knew I wasn't just, just talking off the top of my head. Experience counts, but making sure that experience is voiced in a way that is meaningful. So, as there's wisdom in many counsels, as said.
Yeah.
So sometimes complementarity counts. The fact that she is a neatnik and I'm a little bit of a slob actually works, because I like to cook and I mess up the kitchen like anything, but I would hate cleaning it. She loves cleaning it.
Not really, but but I want it clean, so I have to do it.
Right, but she cleans and she doesn't complain. Okay, especially if the meal is really good. So and there's other things where we actually we complement each other. Because she was saying, I never heard of Broadway play. I never heard pop music growing up, and I kind of learned to like it quite a lot because she exposed me to something different.
So
Simpatico, go ahead. Go ahead.
Simpatico, or becoming one, can happen with two completely different people. You don't have to be like.
Right. Yeah. We still are independent individuals. And believe me, we do have times when we don't think alike.
Yeah.
Yep.
I would say that's the other thing. I think that just got to work. You got to learn not to sweat the small stuff. Some things just aren't important. I mean, some of the times you see people arguing over the dumbest things. We went through life. We right now, to be honest with you, after I was a professor, I retired from the university in 2004, and I started a business with some venture capitals. And for 10 years, I ran that business, and then I retired again at 75 when I got real sick. But in those years, actually, I made a lot of money, a lot more money I ever made being a teacher. And so now it's not so tight. But there was a time in our lives when money was very, very tight. And just an example, we had real differences. She went out and spent a lot of money on a credit card, and I couldn't pay those bills. And she says, well, the kids need this, the kids need that. I said, yeah, the kids need all of that. And we're also going to go to bankruptcy if you keep spending it. So she says, well, do whatever you want. So I cut up all the credit cards. Okay. And I said, look, I just cut my face. I said, this is the solution. When you're an alcoholic, you got to stop drinking. When you're a spendaholic, you got to stop spending. I said, from now on, you only spend what's in the checkbook. And we had to do that for a number of years, because when I was the first assistant professor, she told me she was a nurse. Well, she didn't work for 14 years while the kids were growing up. And then she went back to nursing. So during that time, I was owning my salary, and I was a very low ranking person. And we were really struggling. And so we had to take those measures. And then we find here that a lot of marital problems with young people today is financial, because it's so easy to get a credit card, to spend that money, and not realize that someday you got to actually pay the bill. And we've had that has been a major problem we found in the ecclesia. And sometimes what we did with some couples, I said, I'm taking over your finances for 6 months. The ecclesia will pay your bills until you get settled. You're not to spend another penny. We will take care of your bills. until you get back on even keel. And you know that actually worked. When they started realizing that somebody else had to take care of them because they were in such trouble, and the ecclesia was willing to pay for it until they got on firm footing, realizing they would be too embarrassed to ever fall in that situation again, and they never did. And that's happened on several different occasions.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
go ahead. You sent some other questions here. Two completely different personalities, Messi and Neatneck. Well, we already talked about that.
Yeah, we definitely.
What is more difficult with two different personalities is if one person is very family oriented and their family is everything, and the other person's family is got huge in-law problems. That can cause real difficulty.
Well, we had that initially because, as I said, my parents were very much against us marrying because I wasn't going to be a Catholic anymore.
Yeah.
And they didn't come to our wedding. They didn't talk to us for a couple of years.
Oh, wow.
But then it got to the point that they felt comfortable. They saw that we were good for each other. I think that's the best way to put it.
I'll tell you.
Yep.
The Italians, they're very family oriented, and we had holidays. Either we had the holiday or his brother and his family. My parents were always included, and they finally
came around.
I'll tell you how weird it is. When her dad died, we went out to Mary's hometown, and there was a wake afterwards over the house. And one of her relatives he's a priest or a brother?
He was a brother.
He's a
whatever
Catholic,
that means.
Catholic brother. No, he was there, but her mother asked me to say the prayers.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, it came full circle, really.
Yeah. She wouldn't read any literature. She didn't want to hear anything. But so we had an impact a little bit.
So you said, just to wrap up this simpatico, in the end, it's only going to work if the two of you are committed to the marriage and you talk through everything where you have disagreements. Without the best advice I give you is not our advice. It's what the Apostle Paul said. Don't let the sun go down on your wrath. If you have a disagreement, talk it through. Don't go to bed mad. And I can honestly say, in all the years we've known each other, even before we were married, we never went to bed mad. We may have had a few bad hours, but we've never, ever had a bad day.
Right. We didn't,
right.
and you don't wake up the next morning and start in again.
Yeah.
You've got to let it go.
Sort it out that night.
God.
It pays to have a bad memory.
So
Well, Bob Lloyd,
what do you do where one of the partners is just not interested in pulling in that same direction?
But where the other partner says, I really want more oneness, more simpatico in my life, but the other's just not interested. Is there anything we can do there?
Well, look, we're not professional counselors. In some cases where things are really serious, like abuse or alcohol, we refer them to professional counseling. We have a person, we know people who are professional, like psychology, who are Christian. So they don't get one of these go in and say, give up your religion.
Yeah, but what he's saying, and I think the only thing you can do in that kind of a situation is try to make some socials with the couple. Maybe have another couple and, 2 or 3 couples and just make it a social so that they feel comfortable. Don't sit there and just, well, we're going to do our readings and we're going to talk about it, and lambaste him with it all or her, but make a social out of it and let them get to know the couples in the meeting.
Sometimes you just got to be a referee. you have to be a referee. You have the couple over, always have a good meal. I don't know with Italians, food.
It does
settles.
make people relax.
It's very hard to argue over while you're eating good
Food
meal.
and
Just
food
the
and
rule
wine.
is we're not going to talk about anything controversial. Just eat, enjoy the meal, get everybody relaxed, then sit down and say, yeah, talk, but don't interrupt when he's talking, and you don't interrupt when she's talking, and let them chat. And it's amazing sometimes that they never had. As I said, you're a referee. And it's amazing sometimes how they said, "Well, I didn't know she felt that way," or "I didn't know he felt that way." Sometimes people have to learn to communicate.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. I love that. Just getting people together to be able to talk in a way that's perhaps just a little bit more controlled, a little bit more giving them the opportunity to do it in a non-threatening environment where they're not going to jump down each other's throats. Yeah, I think that's great advice.
Sometimes when we've had a really touchy situation, we'll actually take them out to dinner at a restaurant.
Yeah, we've done that.
Because it's much harder to be a complete jerk in a public place.
That's
Seriously.
true.
Seriously. And even when people have unhappy with the meeting or haven't been coming to the meeting, I, like with Tug and others, I say, yeah, why don't you meet me? Meal's on me. And it is much harder to be a big jerk in a public place, and that's helpful. I'm not saying that we've had some cases here where I don't think anybody can help. I mean, if you're an alcoholic and you refuse to get help or go, we refer them to AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's good. It's actually a Christian program, and people need to do that if they're willing to do it. But some people are self-destructive. There's almost no way you can help them. I mean, if you cannot get help if you don't want help.
Yeah.
So one thing to do whatever you're doing there, and what we try to do with our spiritual welfare committee, is to be proactive. If you see somebody in the meeting having some difficulties, don't wait for them to ask. Ask them, if they're a friend of yours, it's called, I learned this maybe 30 plus years ago. I started working at Oxford in the late 70s because they offered me a job there, and we went there for a while. Mary didn't like England, but so we started going back and forth and had a joint appointment. I go most summers and spend some sabbaticals there, and I got to know Brother Dennis Gillett very, very well. And Dennis is like a spiritual father to me. What they did in Oxford, what I learned to do there, and what we sort of try to organize here, is they have the shepherds group. Each arranging brother had 1/7 of the ecclesia that they needed to keep in contact with all the time.
Okay.
If they weren't in meeting, they got a call. If they had a baby, they made sure they had and when they had someone was in trouble, someone knew about it immediately, not when it became a disaster. And they called it in Oxford shepherds groups. In Ann Arbor, we call it a spiritual welfare committee. And we try to keep on tap of everybody every week. Not because if they're not coming for 6 months and then you call them up, they feel confrontational. But if somebody's always concerned about you, somebody is saying, "Hey, it's my turn to come." We have these what do we call them? Luncheons, or are they dinners now?
Well, I don't know what they are. We used to have
before the pandemic.
Somebody would
they can't do it right now.
Somebody get together and divvy up the meeting, or the people that want to go to a dinner and you go to somebody else's house. It may be somebody you know real well, and maybe you don't. And maybe there are another couple there, and you get to know them on a social level, not
social
just
basis.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bible class or memorial service. It's different.
If you see a person only on Sunday morning or on a Bible class night, it's really tough to talk about anything personal under those circumstances. You got to get to know them more than that, and that's what we've tried to do here in Ann Arbor. And I don't take any credit for them. I say it goes back to what I learned years back with the Oxford meeting is a wonderful place. We really loved it there. In fact, it's kind of funny. After Dennis passed, Paul Richards became the recording brother for some years, and he knew I'd come over on summer because I had to bring my samples and work with the people there for 2-3 months. So he used to put on the speaker's schedule TBA. He'd have 1 or 2 TBAs
During the summer.
between April and September, and when he sent me this schedule, I said, "Well, that's interesting. What's TBA mean?" He says, "It says try Bilello again." That was a very close. It was a close meeting. It put to shame anybody who said the British were cold, because we never found anyone.
Never
found anyone cold in Oxford.
Yeah. Well, we're coming to the wrap up time for our session, but we would just like to ask you, what would be your best advice for couples in 2021?
Okay, our best advice, huh?
Yeah. Well,
I'm glad you prefaced it, because he could have said, I'm obviously not going to give you my worst advice, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is what's called, this is what professors do on students. If you're going to say, please give us your advice, you should assume it's going to be my best advice. You see, you're almost implying that we wouldn't give you our best advice.
Just
let's
give
him our second best advice. This is another thing. If you want a good simpatico, you better have a good sense of humor.
Yeah. That's one thing John has.
Yeah.
I can get mad at him about something, and I would drag it on. And the next thing I know, he's made a joke or he's done something that I can't help but laugh, and it's over.
All right, so give him your mediocre advice.
I'm trying to think.
Well,
something that I heard a while back that young couples were doing, they were looking in the ecclesia and watching the couples, the older couples, for how they reacted, how they treated one another, for examples of what they think would have been a good marriage. With, I can't think of.
I'll give you a few things that I've thought about. First, don't sweat the small stuff. Don't let little things aggravate you. So it's simple, very simple. If your husband is one of these guys who leaves his socks in the middle of the living room floor, you can make a battle about it, okay? Or you can just pick up the socks and put them in the hamper yourself, all right? That's one. The same thing. There are little things that Mary might irritate me about. It's not that important. Don't make a big deal out of trivial things. And a lot of things in marriage do a little. He always does that. That's the second thing. Don't use the word always.
I do it all the time.
It's a very bad habit, because if you're going to discuss the issue, discuss the issue. Don't bring up, you always do that. That just adds fuel to a fire and causes so the word always should be out of your vocabulary. Also, learn to tolerate what you can't change. You can't say after 60-something years of marriage, I'm not going to change. I wasn't going to change after 6 weeks of marriage. There are certain things that you just need to say, that's what they are. And then that's the other thing. I don't. I said I fell in love with Mary at first sight. We didn't get married until 2 years later. I mean, we had a lot of correspondence. We went together a lot. We spent a lot of time together. Don't rush into a marriage. I think one of the chapters in the book, you need to really get to know the person. This idea that I got to get married. Sometimes I see this with kids. They go, well, I got to get married because this way I get rid of lust and other desires. And they don't think through. If you're going to spend a lifetime with someone, you better get to know them. And I don't think you can do that in 6 months or,
Well, and you still, with dating, as long you don't really know the person, you know quite a bit about them and know some of the idiosyncrasies until you live together. Then you learn even more, but you've got to be open about it.
And with me, family is very important. So I wanted Mary to get to know my family. In fact, the first time I took her to a family dinner, it didn't turn out too well for her. Okay.
So it's fine.
We had been going together. It was Easter.
So we've been dating since October.
So it was something 7 or 8 months, 7, 8 months.
Yeah.
So an Italian family, those days, my grandmother and grandfather on my mother's side, they were the head of the family. So they had all the holidays. So it turns out now we're the head of the family, which is why we're going to have a group coming over here within about 30 minutes. So what happened was she wasn't used to Italian meal. I mean, Italian meal, there's a reason it's called antipasto. That means before the pasta. So there was this big antipasto with cheeses and salamis and some. And then came the pasta, which was a homemade lasagna with homemade noodles and everything. And then after that, on Easter, there comes the roast lamb, the vegetables, the homemade bread, salad. Well, anyway, we got to the pasta course, and she took this big piece. She took this lasagna, and then she wanted more. And I said, "Hey, take it easy. Take it easy." Well, she didn't really realize. I don't think it registered to her since this is not the way her family ate it all. Pasta. So anyway,
was the main dish.
When the rest of the food came, she was full. I can't eat anymore. I don't want any more. And she didn't eat anything else the rest of the meal. Afterward, my grandmother took her aside, me aside. She says, "If you marry this girl, you're going to starve." So you asked for advice for the future. You need to get to know each other's families and in order to know whether you can live with it or not, because a lot of marriages fall down on in-law problems.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Now, okay. Now with Mary's family, I'm sorry. With Mary's family, they rejected the religion and they didn't come to the wedding and all that. But a couple of years later, we went out there with my grandfather. And we spent a weekend there talking to them. And eventually we made it. And her father eventually became very close to me. He helped me build things and work on the house. He taught me how to be a gardener. And they spent all our holidays with her. Her brother actually married a woman who converted and became a Catholic, and then would virtually have nothing to do with them because she didn't like her mother.
Okay.
So that's another advice. Get to know the families. You're going to have to live with these people, and if the family is not an issue, well, that's something different. But in-law problems cause a lot of difficulties.
Yeah.
So I've given you 5 things there. Don't sweat the small stuff. Learn to tolerate what you can't change. Get to know the family. Spend time getting to know each other. Even if you fall in love with first sight, make sure that first sight was good vision. And the kind of And the final thing is learn to communicate. Talk through issues. Without using that word always.
Scream and yell a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, sometimes the volume level might go up, but
especially if you're Italian.
Physical abuse is intolerable.
Yeah,
we've had to deal with that. Even it's absolutely intolerable. If we found a couple here, and we've had this happen, where the husband. And here's another case where you pay attention to in your meeting here. Notice this sister in the height of summer was wearing long sleeve dresses. And why was she doing it? It was quite obvious, and I figured it. So I went over and I just had, and she jumped. And then I said, "What's going on?" And it was her husband was beating her, punching her on her arms and everything, and she was black and blue. So you need to pay attention and keep your eyes on. Right away, it hit us. Why is that? Didn't wait. We didn't wait 6 months or the whole time. Why? That was out of place. And because we had this relationship with them, we immediately suspected something.
Right.
So
yeah.
So you got 5 things for the future. 1 or 2 of them might work. So, every marriage is different. Every marriage is to some marriages, 4 of those 5 don't mean anything. But sometimes the one that isn't is now. Oh, there's one other thing that is in there, which we've seen breakdown, is pornography. Today, the internet is so evasive. It's so evasive and everything that you can get drawn into it, and you need to treat that as just like any other addiction. It's got to be treated, and there are actually places like AA for treating that. If that's in there, it can't be washed under the carpet. It's got to be controlled. I'm not saying cured. I don't know if there's a cure to alcoholism or any addiction, but you need to. The person has to be willing to deal with it and control it so it does not become part of their life.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've really enjoyed talking to you. We've taken that invitation that you gave us earlier, pop in and see you sometime when we're over that way.
We'd love to.
And you absolutely convinced me you're with your description of the food. So when we come, we're really looking forward to the dinner.
Well, two things. I don't know yet, but Mary and I may be taking an around the world cruise next year. Because they're giving fantastically low rates. I think one of the stops is in Sydney. If we can afford that one that stops in Sydney, I would dearly like to meet you if we have a whole day in Sydney.
Yeah, but they're in New Zealand.
We're in New Zealand.
Not Sydney, Auckland.
Auckland.
One of the cruises stops in Auckland. Yeah, we've been to Auckland before. Sorry we didn't meet you. It stops in Auckland, and I think that's the only stop in New Zealand.
Yeah,
I think so. Because I think it comes down from Hawaii, goes to Auckland, then crosses over, goes to Sydney, and then goes south to Melbourne, I believe, and loops around and ends up going to Southeast Asia. I don't know if we can afford that particular one because some of them bypass. Yeah, some of them bypass New Zealand. We do want to get to Sydney because God willing, we'd like to see Pat and Anthony Oosthuizen, who we got very friendly with when we were in South Africa and when they came here visiting us. If you come here, you don't want to come in winter. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think you'll tolerate it.
Yeah, Michigan winters are, for a New Zealander, Michigan winters can be brutal.
Okay.
And it's hard to get around with snow and everything on it. The nicest time here is spring or fall.
Okay.
We will certainly bear that in mind.
Yeah, thank you for that. And if anyone wants to get in touch with us and get the regular email about family matters, just email robert@thinkythings.com and I'll add you just for family matters in the title bar and I will add you to the email. And you can see past recordings, including this one in a few weeks' time, on just Google Pakuranga Christadelphians and you'll be able to find them there under the Family Matters link.